Hi, everybody. Welcome to Do You Believe on ParanormalZoneTV. Hey, thanks, everybody, for joining me tonight on this Sunday night. This wonderful weekend that we're having. Hotter than heck here. And guess what? Tonight, would everybody please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so. Those of you who are first joining us for the first time, welcome to the show. And I want to say hi to everybody. I have chat open, and thanks so much, everyone, for being here. And also, would you please give the show a like? Thank you. I'd really appreciate it. Now, tonight, I have my dear friend, Andrea Perron, and I'm so excited to have her back. Andrea first did a live show with me. I interviewed her in June of 2012. And Andrea, I believe that was your very first interview.
It was. It was my first live radio interview, and I was stoked. It was like everything inside of me just needed to burst out, and boy, did you get it.
Oh my God, the show lasted for over 2 hours, I think.
It was.
It's in 2 parts. Oh God, and I'm so thrilled to have you back. Now, Andrea, you have been on just about everybody's talk show.
I have.
And you have. And if anybody wants to watch that interview that I aired with Andrea, it's on my channel. Just look for it. It's on my Paranormal Zone YouTube channel. Just have to go over to my channel and you will find it. And I'm going to be asking Andrea a question tonight that she doesn't remember. And of all the interviews I've heard, Andrea, nobody has asked you this question. And it's because somebody that was in that chat that night was a psychic, but we'll go back to that. All right, so Andrea, tell everybody. Oh, first of all, Andrea, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, before I do that, I want to thank you for launching my live broadcast career. It turned into a career on the radio, and it's just so wonderful. I mean, you were really my inspiration, and I always wanted to do my own thing, and thanks to the inimitable George R. Lopez, I now have an opportunity to do that. He and I launched our own show together called The World Awakening on Blog Talk Radio. It's also on YouTube, and we have listeners internationally. It is just a wonderful broadcast that we do on Tuesday nights. So I'm no competition to you.
Oh, God. Listen, I've listened to your show. You guys are awesome. Awesome. I love it. And do you post on your page? I wish that you would just post on my page too, or tag me so I can be reminded of your shows.
Oh, I sure will, honey. I absolutely will. And do the same thing. Go like my page and you'll get notifications too. It's A World Awakening on Facebook. You can also find it on YouTube.
Okay.
It's a joy to do this with George. We kind of read each other's thoughts, our minds. Only one night did I trollop all over him. I got on live with Chase Klotsky, a friend of mine. He was lucky if he got to talk for 20 minutes out of 2 hours. I'm sure it was less than that. Bless his heart. I turned around, I looked at the clock, I was like, oh my God, I have just talked straight for 1 hour and 40 minutes with this woman.
Oh.
And so, yeah, I hogged the radio show that night, but I've been trying to make it up to him ever since.
So, Andrea, tell everybody a little bit about your book, because I've got questions to ask you.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I can stay as long as you like tonight, so, let's just keep this puppy rolling.
Okay.
I am so thrilled and so delighted to announce that Volume 3, the final volume of the trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light, has gone into print. It is available directly from my publisher at authorhouse.com. It will be available momentarily on Amazon as soon as they load the file. All the e-readers will have it in the next few days. It's out there in a big way. And the thing that's so interesting about publishing is that now for the third time, the third and final installment in the series, I will have people already reading the book, if not all the way through it, before before, I actually have my hands on a copy.
Now,
And the reason is because all of it is done over a computer. And then my brilliant team at Author House puts together all of my work and sends it to me and says, is this how you want it? No, I want you to change this, this, and this. And then I send it back, and it's a long, laborious process. But in the final analysis, I have gotten exactly what I wanted. I was in control of every step of the process. No one owns the rights to our story except me. And it is absolutely liberating to publish this way.
Awesome.
I had offers from trade publishers, but they wanted to own the rights to the story, and they wanted to manipulate it however they saw fit that would accommodate their bottom line in terms of profitability. And I didn't put 7 years of my life, start to finish, literally day to day. It took 7 years to the day to get this book into publication, this series of books. And I'm very proud of it. I will tell you, and I've told your listeners before, it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for the lazy. This is interactive literature. You will feel like you went and lived at the farm with us for 10 years when you're done reading this trilogy of books. And it is filled with the philosophy and the science and the physics and the math and the theology and everything that has to do with the paranormal. And the reason why is because I don't see the point in asking a question about what is spirit without coming up with some kind of valid information to enlighten people about the experience that we had. If they are seeking nothing but a series of scary stories that will make their hair stand up on end, a little book that they can take into the bathroom with them, this is not the book. It's not. Each volume is, the first two are over 500 pages, the second one is 400. They are big, voluminous, heavy volumes, 1,500 pages in total. And in that time period, it begins before we moved to the farm. Everything that happened that had to happen.
Oh, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. Andrea, you're going to do another show with me where we're going to talk about that.
Well, that's true. That's absolutely true.
Now,
I'm going to do as many shows with you as you ever asked me to do with you. Because you see, you're the one that put me out into the world. And you're the one that got my book noticed. You, personally. I owe you a tremendous debt of gratitude, Maureen. You've been lovely to me.
Oh, Andrea, please. You're such a sweetheart, my God. You know, you're a good person. So, hey, now, I just want to say one more thing about that third book. They're making a movie out of that one, aren't they?
No. It's, you're thinking of The Conjuring 2 and The Conjuring 3. Both of those films are follow-ups to the original film that was based around our family. But neither of them have anything to do with our family at all. They are actually a continuation of what the intention was originally, to tell Ed and Lorraine's most compelling investigations. And Ed and Lorraine Warren always said that the Perron family investigation was the most compelling and dark and disturbing and significant of all the investigations that they ever conducted over the course of their famously ghost story career. So that's, of course, the one that they went with first. It was a huge success worldwide. It has brought attention to our story in a way that nothing else could have.
Okay, so... Oh, I see. So, and actually, wasn't The Conjuring supposed to be the Warren Files?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was originally The Conjuring. There was a copyright infringement issue around the use of that name. That was resolved. In the interim, the working title was The Warren Files. I think that the reason they didn't go with that is because it sounded almost political in terms of, the Warren Commission. They didn't want people to think that it was, about that part of our history, that was actually about Ed and Lorraine Warren.
Actually, you're absolutely right, because I'm thinking paranormal, but most people are thinking the other way.
Right, exactly, because most people don't really know about them in depth. Really, it's relegated almost exclusively to the well-educated paranormal community, who realizes that Ed and Lorraine Warren, for all of their faults and foibles, were they were really the founders of a movement. And they were the first ones out there really doing this in a public way, talking very openly about supernatural activity at a time when that was a taboo subject, and people kind of snuck to their would sneak into their seminars and stuff, and they were fascinated and they were interested and they wanted to know more. But they knew that was not something that they could turn around and go home and talk with their family about at the dinner table. It was just a different time, and it was one of the reasons why I think we waited as long as we did. I knew from a young age that ultimately I would be the one that told this story in one form or another. But it was more than 30 years before we divulged anything outside of our family and very close circle of friends. Some of our very closest friends knew absolutely nothing about our haunted house until I published the first book, and they were stunned and astounded.
Okay, so first of all, I want to ask you, how much of The Conjuring tells your story?
It tells the story in very broad strokes, and if you've listened to some of my interviews, you've heard me use this phraseology before. The fine lines of history are written in the books. There's no way that they could have conceivably squashed 10 years of events into a 2-hour film, not to mention the fact that Ed and Lorraine Warren's investigation of our farm occurred between 1973, October of 73, and July or August of 74. So a very short period of time, considering we lived there for 10 years. There were many, many incidents that the Warrens didn't know about that happened after they were completely out of the picture. So they worked with limited information in terms of what Mrs. Warren could provide. I gave them information. Of course, Volume 1 of the trilogy was already in the public domain. They had access to that. I gave them a 3-page handwritten timeline of major manifestations, which is a thing of beauty and a joy forever. I love it. It's one of my favorite keepsakes. It took me days, took me a week to compile it, but I did, and I sent that to them, which gave them sort of a chronological series of events to follow. For all intents and purposes, they used none of it. For all intents and purposes, what they did was take and cherry pick from the information I provided them, the information that Mrs. Warren provided them, and then they created a third story that they thought would be palpable to the public, because they knew enough about our story to realize that the truth of it was stranger than fiction, and they wanted to be able to build the film as based on a true story and have it be semi-believable. In the process of doing that, they created a whole third scenario that really did not resemble nor reflect what actually happened. For instance, I'll give you a for instance. Let's start right at the top of the list. My mother would not have ever attempted to plunge a pair of scissors into one of her children. Insanity. That's what they did was they took what Mrs. Warren said, which was Bathsheba was the culprit, which we don't believe at all. We don't think it was her. We think it was another spirit that actually died 100 years before Bathsheba was even on the scene. And they tried to make it so that her spirit had oppressed and possessed my mother. There was the whole cellar scene in the movie. Nothing of the sort happened. There was was no exorcism. The Warrens didn't move in with us. We were not the godless heathens as juxtaposed to the devotional, devout Roman Catholic Warrens. We were all born and raised Catholic. We were all baptized into the church. You know, the whole 9 yards. The church turned from us. They were terrified of what was going on at our house, and asked my father if he would kindly take our family and worship elsewhere. And that was the last time that we ever went to church together as a family. It was on Easter Sunday in 1973. So, you know, there were a lot of license taken with the telling of the story. However, they got the big picture right. James Wan did, I think, a masterful job making the film. He did not rely on CGI. He relied on the tension. He relied on... There were people at the premieres who were previewing this. You know how they do previews of films, and you have to fill out a form and say if you liked it or you didn't and why. They had people bolting out of the theater when this film was being previewed prior to its release. And everyone was coming back with consistently the same answer when, of course, they were stopped at the door. And when asked why they were leaving the theater, they said it was getting to be too much. They were too invested in the family and too concerned that they were going to see something terrible happen to one of the kids. And so they pre-dreaded how the outcome would be, and it was their own imaginations that ran them out of the theater, which I thought was fascinating. James did a great job with the cast. I think they cast it absolutely perfectly. They had my father being so gracious and amenable in terms of his interaction with the Warrens. Nothing could have been further from the truth. And I mean to tell you, nothing. My father was obnoxious and belligerent and uncooperative, and he wanted nothing to do with them. So, you know, there are many, many discrepancies, Noreen, but ultimately they got the story right in that good conquers evil and love conquers fear. And that was the main message of the story. And so what it was ultimately was the Perron family had an extreme haunting, and it was resolved, and, you know, everybody lived happily ever after. Well, it was resolved, but it wasn't resolved by the Warrens. We lived in that house for another 7 years before we actually left. And this is an ongoing saga, because every single one of us was profoundly changed by that experience. And it opened a door, as you well know. You open a door to spirit, you are touched by spirit, you never close that door again. It remains a permanent part of your life, a permanent part of your psyche, and that door remains open. Every single one of us has had innumerable experiences since we left that farm, and none of us had, except for my mother as a very young child, none of us had any experiences like that prior to moving to the farm.
So you're still okay, but I was going to touch on that in a little bit. So you moved into this house. You were what, 15 years old?
No, I was 12.
Oh, you were 12.
I was 12. My youngest sister April was 5 when we moved in.
And that was in 1971?
Yes, it was. We had purchased the house. My parents closed on the deal in December of 1970. My mom didn't want to move over the holidays, so we ended up moving into the house, lock, stock, and barrel in a caravan on January 11th, 1971.
And you and your mother knew nothing about the history of this house? Was this house occupied before you moved in?
Yes, it was, by an elderly gentleman named Earl Kenyon. His wife had died sometime prior. He had lived in the house alone for a number of years. And he was, it was a very remote location. It's way out there. You know, even you think of little Rhode Island, that, you know, there can't be anything that's remote about it. Well, that's not true. Most of the population of Rhode Island lives in 5 major cities right around Narragansett Bay. And so there are vast tracts of open land still left in one of the earliest colonies. And it was a bucolic, pastoral, beautiful way to grow up. And we all loved the house, even though it was not a very comfortable house. It was just cold and drafty and clapboard and no insulation, and you know how cold it can get in New England. So it was, it had its challenges, but we really loved the place. And interestingly, we went to visit Mr. Kenyon there. He knew right away he wanted our family to have the house. My mother put earnest money down on that property immediately, the second she looked at it. And it took about 5 months to complete the whole deal, new survey and the whole 9 yards. But we visited there a number of times before we actually inhabited the house. And none of us had an experience on that property prior to the day we moved in. On the day we moved in, my father, in the midst of a swirling snow and ice storm, threw open the back of the moving van, handed me a box, said, "Take this to your mother in the kitchen." I walked through the parlor door off the front porch, took a hard right through the dining room, greeted a man that was standing over in the corner of the dining room who was watching Mr. Kenyon pack the very last of his belongings out of the china cabinet. And I greeted him, and he just ignored me like I did not exist, like I was a ghost passing by him. He was a ghost. I didn't know it. He was such a solid apparition to my sight that when April didn't see him, but when Christine saw him, Cindy saw him, and then Nancy walked into the kitchen, and she said, "Mom, who is that man standing in the dining room? He just disappeared."
Oh, my God.
And that was the very beginning of it, and we hadn't been in that house 5 or 10 minutes.
Oh.
And our animals would not go in that house. Our animals had to be dragged, kicking and screaming into that house.
Oh, my God. And so that was an indication. Did you think anything of it when you moved in, when this was happening?
No, absolutely not. It wasn't even on the radar. It was not a consideration. Nobody thought, "Oh my God, we bought a haunted house." Nobody even considered it. We thought we were getting, just one of the original Rhode Island plantations. Rhode Island and Providence Plantations is the name of the state. It was a piece of land that had been parceled out in 1680. The house, completed as it is now, was finished in 1736. It was started in the 1600s and then added on to over the course of decades as the family burgeoned. It is an absolute architectural masterpiece. It is one of the finest colonial homes in this country. It is absolutely a stunning piece of property. When we bought it, it had 200 acres. And it was originally deeded in acreage that was in the thousands. The original cemetery to the place was on their land, and it's more than a mile away from the farmhouse. So it was an expansive, huge piece of land, and Roger Williams did that deliberately to try to keep Connecticut from encroaching into the colony from the west and to keep the Massachusetts Bay Colony from encroaching from the north and east. And so he parsed out huge pieces of land to the original landowners and established the colony of Rhode Island.
All right, so now I'm going to ask my question.
Okay.
UFOs. Do you remember
did
that?
I avoid that?
No, you
that subject the first time.
No. Well, you said. Do you remember what you said?
No, I don't. Remind me.
There was a psychic in the chat room, Janet Russell, and she had been abducted by UFOs, but for some reason she felt there was a connection to UFOs on your property. And you were so shocked and taken back because, and I thought, oh my God, did we do something wrong, And you said, and nobody has ever asked you that question. So now I want you to answer it.
How did I answer it then, Noreen?
You didn't fully answer it. You were in shock. And you said yes.
Around it, didn't I?
Yes.
Didn't I do the happy dance around it?
Yes. So tell me.
Okay, I don't do the happy dance around it anymore. Yes, there is absolutely, on some level, in some way, in a multidimensional universe, I believe that if everything is integrated and all is on, and everything is energy. I believe that there is some correlation between ufology and extraterrestrial existence and spiritual manifestations, but I still don't know what it is. That's where my research has gone lately.
Do you believe, you don't think anybody was ever abducted by UFOs, do you, in your family?
No, I don't believe that anybody was abducted. I know that Cindy had an extremely close encounter.
She did.
Cindy had an experience, but it wasn't in Rhode Island. It was in Georgia after we left the farm. My father has had innumerable experiences. Everybody in our family has had some encounter with something an anomaly that cannot be explained in the night sky. Or we have seen something, we saw a small craft land and burn a hole in our cornfield behind the farm. It was gorgeous. It was absolutely beautiful. It was very small. It had panels of lights that were generated all around it. It was maybe no more than 1.5 to 2 feet in diameter. And when it took off in a shot, like in a split second. It was gone, literally in a split second. All you could see that was left of it was the residual light just in the eyes. That was it. My sister Christine saw that, and it shocked her so much that she has no recollection of it. She just blocked it out completely. It was nothing she wanted to process or deal with. She had enough on her plate. So she doesn't remember her close encounter, but I do. I was standing right next to her when it occurred. We saw some very interesting stuff going on in the night sky. You know, keep in mind, we lived in a very secluded, remote area. There were no street lights. There were no lights. You couldn't see our nearest neighbor. There was just no residual light at all, anywhere. So when we went out into the yard at night at the farm, we could see the Milky Way, we could see every constellation, we could see everything. But one night was a particularly dark night, and my mother was doing dishes in the pantry, and I was standing right beside her, and we saw some very interesting light anomaly going on out through the glass. And we put our soapy dish rags down and said, let's go look. And we went outside, and then everybody started looking for us and then following us, and everybody went outside and looked up in the sky, and there were 3 lights. They kept making a triangle formation, but then they would split off from each other, and they were moving at vast distances in what appeared to be literally a split second. Vast distances across the sky, as though they were graphing the earth, as though they were doing precise measurements, or, there seems to be something mathematical going on. And we watched them for about 15 or 20 minutes, maybe longer, and then all of a sudden, all 3 of them shot off in different directions, and they were gone. And I said to my mother, what was that? And she said, that's what's called a UFO. Well, that's all I needed to know. I was young. I was 12, 13, 14 years old, right in through there. It was not that long after we moved to the farm. And I started doing research and started reading and everything that I could get on the subject matter. And then I'll tell you the most, up until about 2 years ago, the most extraordinary experience in terms of contact that I had ever had in my life was standing on the front lawn of this expansive front lawn of the farm. And keep in mind, there were 7 of us, and everybody had a bajillion friends. It was very unusual for one of us to be alone anywhere, anytime on that property. And I don't know how I ended up where I was. I don't recall. It was one of those before and after moments. Everything changed in that moment for me. And I don't recall why I was outside by myself, but I do remember looking up at the sky and seeing a kind of cloud that I'd never seen in my life. It registered in my little young brain that I'd never seen this before.
Oh, my God.
And it looked like orange and paisley and mauve-colored cotton balls in the sky, and it was in the middle of the day. Now, I can understand if it were at sunset and certain hue was cast because of the sunset into the clouds. We've all seen that. But it was in the middle of the day. And I looked up, I kind of threw my head back, and I was looking at the sky, marveling at how beautiful it was. It was as if somebody had poured out 1,000,000 pounds of cotton balls into the sky, and they were gorgeous. And I was just transfixed by seeing something brand new in life. Which I always enjoy anyway, going someplace I've never been, seeing something I've never seen, meeting people I've never met. It's the joy of life. So I'm standing there, and I'm just taking it all in, being a little bit of a nature freak, tree hugger anyway. And all of a sudden, it started getting very dark, very fast. Very dark, very fast. And I didn't turn around. I bent my head back further to see what was casting the shadow. And as I stood in the middle, now some people are not going to believe that. They're going to say she's a flake, give it up, she's just out there. But I am telling you what I know. Not what I believe, what I know. And what I know is that an entire flotilla of ships passed silently over my head across the piece of property that I lived on. The big one, the really huge one, is the one that was casting the shadow. But it was followed by probably 25 to 40 other ships that were all in the shapes of geometric forms.
Oh my God.
And it was completely surrounded. I didn't find out for 40 years that there were a multitude of sightings at that time, not only along the eastern seaboard where people saw this flotilla. This is the same flotilla that crossed over Western Europe. And when the UK started scrambling their fighter jets, it made a hard right turn and disappeared over the Arctic Circle.
Oh my God.
Now, how privileged do you think I feel?
Wow.
And did I share this with people? I know now why I was so shocked. You were the first one to ask me anything, and I didn't want to draw a correlation between the two, Noreen. I didn't want to. This is going to sound absurd, but I want you to try to understand and grasp what I'm saying. I thought that I would be taken more seriously as a writer and an experiencer of paranormal activity than I would be divulging what I knew about extraterrestrials. And so I kept them absolutely separate and distinct. And it wasn't, and I did not really, I know I did the happy dance. I can think back on it now and know that I skipped right around that and did a little deflection technique. I'm sure I did.
You did.
Because I didn't want to answer that question then. And now, I will talk to anybody. In fact, George and I are speaking at the Starworks Symposium in Laughlin, Nevada, in November, and any of your listeners that are interested, you're close enough in California, any of your listeners that are interested, please contact Paula Harris, one of the preeminent researchers in the world, this is her event, and I would really hope that you could get there too, Noreen, because we are going to be addressing and divulging some things that it's time for the world to know. George and I went to the Starworks Symposium in Chicago last May, and all the way up there, I was being militant Annie. I was like, that's it. I'm going to demand, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Get on the radio, get on television, get out there, and demand full disclosure from the United States government and every government in the world that's got any information about extraterrestrial existence. We want it now. And I was militant Annie. I was radical out there for the last year or so once I spilled my guts to Devin Belanger on Mysterious World TV, because she sprung that question on me, and I did answer it.
Oh, you... now, how did she...
I know, but I had matured, Noreen. Give me some slack here. I was a frightened little kid when I first did and now I'm all grown up, and I'm not afraid of them. In fact, I can't wait to have my next contact. I can't wait. I'm so excited. We're going to go out into the desert while we're in Nevada for the Starworks Symposium and go, do a little ET hunting instead of ghost hunting. I'm very excited about this trip, and I'm very excited about the symposium. But I'll tell you, when we left Chicago, we were driving through Indiana, and I turned and I looked at George, and I said, you know what? They can't. And he knew. He reads my mind anyway. And I said, they can't. He said, the government. I said, they can't disclose. We're the point of disclosure. We in the paranormal community, in the ufology community, that are people who are credible, who are believable, who articulate, are intelligent people, who have everything to lose by telling the truth, are telling it anyway. We're the point of disclosure.
What weekend is that?
Oh, gosh. Oh, you know what? I don't have my calendar in front of me. Hold on.
Well, you'll post on Facebook, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll be all over my Facebook page.
All right.
In fact, there's a posting on it for right now. I try not to even think ahead more than a month. I try not to. I know I've got Scarefest coming up in Kentucky, and I have to go to do a show on Guyam TV in Colorado in September, and October looks like Texas and possibly Rhode Island again, and November is Starworks, and that's it. And then I'm taking December off just to celebrate with my family.
Oh my God, I can't believe I just can't believe this. Okay, so I want to ask you another question now. Okay, so you already told us there was no exorcism that was done.
No, there was no exorcism that occurred in our home.
Okay,
no.
wait.
There was a seance that went terribly, awfully, horribly wrong. Because the Warrens came with a priest and a medium and a whole technical crew of people doing photographs and doing audio tapes and the whole nine yards, and things got very, very out of hand because the medium committed what I consider to be spiritual malpractice, and she threw open wide the doors to the netherworld and invited anybody in that wanted to come so that she could identify who the spirit was that was haunting and taunting my mother. Big, huge mistake. Whatever it was that came through and attacked my mother that night, levitated her, threw her 20 feet in less than a blink of an eye. Not even something that could be recreated. It was that fast. It was interdimensional. If it had wanted to kill her as terribly as it abused her, took her body, wadded it into a ball like Play-Doh, you would have expected to hear her bones snapping. She was speaking in a language that does not exist on this earth. She was screaming in agony. I saw every bit of it. The Warrens were completely freaked out. The priest was hovering in a corner of the dining room, as white as any ghost you could imagine. Casper had nothing on him, and the medium had collapsed on the table. When my father went running to my mother, tried to break away to get to my mother, when she was flung across the room, Ed Warren grabbed his arm and tried to stop him, and my father turned around and cold-cocked him and took that big, giant man right to the floor.
Oh, my God.
It was hellacious in every conceivable sense of that word.
Were they allowed back in your home?
No, they were they were dismissed from the premises that night. I learned language I didn't know that night. My father was livid. He was out of his mind. It took him a good 45 minutes to bring my mother back to consciousness, and because of the nature of what was happening, nobody ran to call. It was before the days of 911, so somebody would have needed to call for an ambulance, and nobody did, because the Warrens didn't want any police there.
Oh, my God. So Keith Johnson was also involved with this. Wasn't he one of the first ones there at your house?
He was the first, and we still don't understand how that happened, because he said he got a phone call from my mother, and my mother said, I never called anyone. I never asked anybody for help. And so we don't know who called Keith Johnson, but we know it wasn't my mother. However, there are very dark forces at work, and there's a connection there that cannot be explained in any rational way. But his brother and their group showed up in August of 1973. and he had such an experience in that house, and I'm sure he has shared it with you. Such a truly over-the-top experience in that house, an attack that he underwent in the house with three of my sisters and one of their friends. And he is the one that informed Ed and Lorraine Warren of the extreme activity in the house. Said they didn't come until the night before Halloween. They came the evening before, right around twilight, about 7 o'clock, about 5 o'clock in the evening they came. And I think that the reason that they came was because they thought that was when the veil would be thinnest, but my argument is there is no veil. They could have, it's always the season of the witch at that house, and they could have come virtually any time and had the same experiences that they had when they came. The reason that Bathsheba Sherman copped all the rap is because when Lorraine walked into our kitchen for the first time, and my mother had no idea who these people were, and Lorraine walked in, introduced herself, said that she and her husband were paranormal researchers, and she walked over to our big black stove in the kitchen, and she put her hand on the corner of it and covered her eyes with her other hand, and she knew nothing, and I mean to tell you, nothing of the history of this house. They came there blind, and just on a reference from Keith Johnson. Wow. And she put her hand over her eyes, and she said, I sense a malignant presence in this house. Her name is Bathsheba. She literally pulled that name out of the ether. So in the process of doing that, from that point on, according to how they documented it in their case files, Bathsheba copped the blame for everything. They didn't even really consider how many other spirits were active in that house. There were several women spirits in the house.
So how many total? How many total do you think were?
At least 12, honey. At least 12.
Okay.
12 that we saw regularly.
And so what part did this Bathsheba play?
Well, she was born in 1812. She died in 1885. So in the film, they've got her killing her own child in 1863, and she was well beyond childbearing years at that point. She couldn't have had a baby. So, that they twisted the history of that as well. But when she was a young woman, late teens, possibly early 20s, she was at the farm and caring for an infant, and the baby died in her care. And when the baby was examined by the local doctor or coroner or whatever they had at that time in history, it was determined that a needle had been impaled at the base of its skull, and the cause of death was listed as convulsions. And there was an inquest, not a trial. There was an inquest to see if they could delve more deeply into how something like this could have happened. And so, surreptitiously, Bathsheba was accused of causing the death of this baby. Well, she talked her way out of it, a la Lizzie Borden. And I don't think that she necessarily did kill the baby. Terrible accidents happen all the time. I think that she should be given the benefit of the doubt. There's no forensic evidence. There was no DNA testing. There's no way to prove anywhere that she deliberately caused the death of this baby. But what happened was when the case was dismissed, did not go to trial, did not go any further, the judge said, there's no evidence here, and this is over, case closed. But in the town, in the area, in the village, in the township, the rumors began spreading. And keep in mind, this isn't that much longer, after what happened in Salem, which was just up the road. That the word got around that Bathsheba Sherman was a witch, and that she was practicing satanic rituals, and that she had sacrificed the life of this infant to the devil to do his bidding in exchange for eternal youth and beauty. Now, by all accounts, and there are no photographs of her, but by all accounts, she was a ravishingly beautiful woman. And the men would look at her with rapacious eyes, and the women just wanted her dead and gone because she was a threat. So, there's the deal. Bathsheba got a bad rap, most likely, from a very young age, and had to live with that her whole life. She eventually married a man named Judson Sherman and moved in at the Sherman Farm, which, as the crow flies, was probably less than a mile away from our farm. She had 4 children. 3 of them were dead by the age of 4 years.
Oh,
so
my God.
Keep in mind now, this is the early 1800s. Yeah. A common cold could kill you.
Yeah.
When you go through the graveyards of New England, it is heartbreaking to see how many little tombstones there are. Some of them don't even have anything inscribed on them. Did you know that there was a time in New England when the tradition was not to even name your child until it was 1 year old?
No, I didn't know that.
Infant mortality rate was that high.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah, that's terrible. I know. I did a show on Victorian era, and I do remember that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I have another question.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Ouija board?
I don't mess with Ouija boards.
No, but wait a minute. Didn't one of your sisters do Ouija in the house?
Yeah, and look how well that turned out, Noreen. Oh my God. I mean, I sometimes wonder. You've read the books. One of the chapters, I can't remember exactly, begins with, "Children are as dumb as dirt," and that is an insult to dirt everywhere. That's how I opened the chapter. And that was the chapter about Nancy and Cindy and Katie, their friend Katie, who came over and slipped one into the house, even though Mrs. Warren had already said, absolutely no Ouija boards, no tarot cards, no nothing disaffiliated or associated with the dark arts is allowed in this house.
Okay, now wait a minute. So why did Lorraine Warren say that statement? Was there some talk that the girls might be doing something like that?
No, it was a forewarning.
Oh, okay.
It was a forewarning. Nothing had happened with the Ouija board in the house yet when they came. It was after they left that Cindy and Nancy and their girlfriend Katie slipped one. Katie came over and slipped one in the house in the lining of her coat.
Oh, my God.
And they had an absolutely horrendous experience up in the middle bedroom on the second floor of the house.
Oh, my God. What happened?
Well, it started as what looked like crows or blackbirds. The walls were all white. They were horsehair plaster, all completely white walls. And they started seeing shadows of what looked like birds flying on the wall. And then all of a sudden, the birds all came together into a circle and then spread out and took on the shape, the face, the shadow, and the silhouette of a wild animal that none of them could identify. The closest that they could come was to say that it looked like a combination of a wolf and a lion.
Oh, my
And
God.
it started to growl and got louder and louder, and the floors were shaking, the girls were screaming, the doors wouldn't open, and this thing turned. At first it was in profile, and it opened its mouth, and they could see something dripping off its fangs.
Oh, my
And then it turned its head, and it faced directly to all 3 of them and roared this horrendous sound that shook the house. It shook the entire house.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, and then, they were screaming. They were begging God to let them out of that room. And
Who was in the house when...
running downstairs and flying. They almost knocked my mother over in the pantry. I was downstairs in the kitchen when they came flying down the stairs. They were literally falling over each other getting down the stairs. They were banged up and bruised and scraped and literally falling down the stairs to get away from what they started.
Oh, my God. Because I remember in the first interview, you were so irate when you mentioned the Ouija board, but you never went into it. Thank you for doing that. I always wanted to know what that was all about.
Well, in a place like that that's that spiritually volatile, I just don't think it's a good idea. I think it's unwise in the extreme to reach out unless you know exactly what you're doing. And, they were just little kids. I was no older than 15 at the time, so Cindy was probably 15, 14, 12, 11, 10, maybe 10, 11. And, they were all roughly the same age, because we were like stepping stones anyway, 5 kids in 7 years, So, it's the Catholic tradition.
Yeah. I'm Catholic, I know.
Keep popping those babies out, you know what I mean? It was a real, and my mother was ripped. Oh, my God. I mean, my mom's very mild-mannered. She is not one to lose her temper. But her whole reaction to that, after having warned every one of us not to do that, not to dabble in the dark arts, not to try to see what's on the other side, leave it alone, leave it alone. I mean, that was drilled into our heads. And when those 3 came flying down those stairs and piled into the kitchen and barreled into my mother, she made them all sit down at the kitchen table and went and got a wet cloth and, wiped their faces off. They'd all been crying hysterically. The tears streaked all over their faces. They were sweating profusely. They were shaking uncontrollably. She put a glass of water in front of each one and then said, "Tell me what happened." And when they did, she went off on Katie, threw Katie out of the house, told her, "Don't you ever come back in this house." She went upstairs, went marching bravely right upstairs, grabbed the board, the planchette, put it all in the box, carried it downstairs, slammed it down on our kitchen table and said, "Now get this out of here and take yourself with it."
Oh, my God.
It was bad. And that's only after she was done ripping them apart. Because she said, godless little heathens get what they deserve. You're so lucky that something came along to help you. Because they begged God to let them out of that room. Those doors would not open. They begged to be released from that room. And finally the doors did open. And, who's to say where the assistance came from? I prefer to think it was divine intervention. I really do, because there's such a track record of that in the house. But, it could have been the entity itself saying, "Okay, I've taught you a lesson, you're free to go." We'll never know. But whatever it was vile. The room smelled like rotten flesh. The whole room, the air was literally unbreathable in the room. The girls were gasping for air. They were retching from the smell in the air.
Oh, my
It was a rancid,
God.
God-forsaken odor, like something that had been laying out in the sun of summer for a week.
Oh, my God, that's horrible.
Yeah, they were, Mom, as far as Mom was concerned, they got exactly what they deserved. She was so angry about that because they had been warned and warned and warned again. And still that happened. Now, there are a lot of people that have a great deal of success with making contact with Ouija boards. The way I look at it is it's kind of a crapshoot. You don't know what you're going to open the door to. For that reason, I do not participate in seances. I do not touch a Ouija board. I do not use tarot cards. My spiritual contact is much lighter than that. I have regular contact, but it's not ominous in any way.
Was there any kind of possession that went on in the house? Did anybody get possessed? Did you?
No.
No, okay.
No, my mother was not possessed. My mother was attacked by something that was invited into the house by a trained medium that should have known better.
And that's because of the seance?
Yes, and the thing is, when she kicked open those doors, whatever it was that came through, it was so horrible. It had all the power it could possibly have needed to kill my mother. We all thought that we watched our mother die that night. It was horrific. And we shouldn't have been watching at all. Cindy and I were watching from one stairwell. April was watching from another. Christine was huddled up under her covers upstairs. Nancy was the only one that wasn't in the house that night. And, none of us should have been exposed to anything like that. That's trauma. That's childhood trauma. Whatever it was could have killed my mother. It opted not to kill her. I look back in retrospect now, and I realize that whatever it was more powerful than anything that the Warrens or anybody else had ever come across before, and it wanted to make its presence known to them.
Now,
it did it very effectively.
How many, do you know how many people might have died in that farmhouse? Or, go ahead.
Well, the history on the house is sporadic at best. But a number of people did die in that house. Mrs. John Arnold hanged herself in the barn. Johnny Arnold killed himself by drinking horse liniment in the eaves. There's a record of Susan Arnold hanging herself in the woodshed. There are a number of women that died on that property. There were men that died on that property. 2 men crawled up underneath the what was a blacksmith shop right on the adjacent corner from the house. During a very bad winter storm, they froze to death. They didn't find their bodies until the spring, and the smell gave it away. That's when they started looking up underneath the blacksmith shop. Mr. Kenyon told us that story. There's a fabulous book called The Black Book of Burrillville. Burrillville is a very haunted town. Where ours was not the only haunted house by a long shot, and I don't know why there was so much supernatural activity going on in the town, but it's a real hotbed of activity. And the Black Book of Burrillville lists literally hundreds of deaths over the course of 2.5 centuries. People dying by the most bizarre means you can imagine. Just very strange deaths, lots of murders, lots of suicides, a very dark history in the town. And the town wasn't even incorporated until around 1850. So it was, people lived there in the villages that later became incorporated as the town of Burrillville. But there are a number of villages that incorporate that town. There's Harrisville, where we were, in Pascoag, and Glendale, Nasonville, Mapleville, Mohegan, on and on and on. There are many, many little hamlets in this relatively large, it's the largest town in Rhode Island, which doesn't say much because the whole state is 23 miles wide and 52 miles long. It's the size of a post.
Yeah.
For God's sake. But, all things being relative, it's the biggest town in the state. And it's, absolutely beautiful, beautiful town. Every village in the town has something so special to offer, and very, very old homes, colonial homes that have been preserved and restored. It's absolutely a magical place, but it has a very dark history, Noreen.
Wow. Andrea, is there anything you'd like to say to those non-believers?
They can non-believe all they want. All they want, whatever makes them happy is all that matters to me. I started, as you know, I began Volume 1. My prologue, my preface to this story was, there are, those who believe will not require convincing, and those who don't, I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. This is our experience. I tell people when I lecture around the country, George has had many experiences. He's a very seasoned investigator. He's had his own team for years and years. He's so totally immersed in the study of this, and we go around the country lecturing together. And one of the things that we keep, bringing up over and over again is it's one thing to believe, and then it's another thing to know. That is a quantum leap between belief, having faith that something exists, and knowing that something exists. And I know. And I don't need to convince anybody of anything, and I am way past the point where I care.
Wow. Andrea, it was such a pleasure to have you on the show. I thank you so much for being on my show again. And everybody, Andrea is coming back. Starting in October, the shows are going to be moving to Thursday nights because I need the weekends free because of my daughter's wedding. she's going crazy because I need to be available for the weekends. And so they're going to be moving to Thursday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. And Andrea's coming back on Thursday, November 6th, which is a full moon. When I gave her that date, she goes, oh, heck, it's a full moon. I'll be there.
Yeah, I did. That's exactly verbatim. That's what I wrote to you. Yeah, I'll be there. Color me there.
Oh, Andrea, thank you so much. What I wants to know, could that entity, I guess, that attacked the girls during the Ouija session, could that have been the same one that was that took over during the seance?
Yes, that's a good question, and I think that's highly plausible.
Okay.
Yep. I think that is highly plausible. I don't know. I don't really use the word demon. I don't know what a demon is. I've never seen a demon. I don't know what a demon is. All I know is what I saw happen to my mother that night, and that was not my mother. That was not my mother. And, human body bends that way, and sounds like that don't come out of human beings. And it was absolutely horrendous. There are no or any other that could express it.
Did your mother have to have any kind of cleansing after that? Because that's a possession.
Well, if my mother was possessed, it was for a relatively short amount of time.
Okay.
And then it levitated her off the floor, and in the chair she was sitting in, she was flung from one room into another. And then it was over. And the medium collapsed on the table. Ed was down on the floor with his nose bleeding. The priest was hovering in the corner, crying and shaking. The tech team was falling apart. And then after my father dismissed them from the house, and that's a euphemism, they were thrown out. Mrs. Warren told her tech team to go into the cellar where they had set up all their state-of-the-art equipment. I mean, thousands of dollars worth of, the big, heavy cameras from back in the day. And those two men went down those cellar stairs trembling. And when they got down there, all of their equipment that they had set up to film activity in the cellar during the seance was in 1,000 pieces all over the cellar, as though somebody had picked up the tripods with those cameras mounted on the top of them and smashed them into the solid granite walls.
I have a question. Did you, and I don't know what NBSP means, think the former owner was trying to warn them when he said he always kept the light on?
Yes, I think he was. I think he was trying to do that in his very sweet, gentlemanly way without drawing unnecessary questions. And the way that my father interpreted it, it was that there were 5 little girls in this new old house where all of our bedrooms were upstairs. There were 2 stairwells for us to traverse, and the only bathroom in the house was on the first floor. So the way that my father interpreted what Mr. Kenyon was saying to him at the time was, for the sake of your family, leave the lights on at night. And my dad correlated that to make sure the girls don't fall down the stairs on their way to the bathroom.
Wow. And that was
so it wasn't until months later that he realized what Mr. Kenyon was trying to tell him.
Wow.
And we found out later, too, from neighbors in the area that there was never a time that anybody drove past that house, no matter what time of night, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. That house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Every single light was on in that house.
Oh my God! And that thank you, Chipeteri, for that question. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for joining us, and I guess we'll say good night.
Well, it's been absolutely wonderful being with you again. It's been too long. At least this time we're not going to go years. We're only going to go a month or so between our chats. But it's been delightful, and I appreciate it. I appreciate all of your listeners. And if anybody wants to start delving in to the books, volumes 1 and 2 are available virtually from any place. Amazon, Author House, Barnes & Noble, any place you can get the first 2 volumes, and the third one is being released now in print and in ebook this week.
And now, do you have a website at all?
I do. It's houseofdarknesshouseoflight.com, and I invite everybody to come join me. I'm full up on Facebook on my personal page, but you can follow it and see everything that's going on. And also I have a book and author page, House of Darkness, House of Light on Facebook. And also I invite everyone to come and start tapping into the archives. We've got some fascinating shows under our belt at A World Awakening, and they can also find that on Facebook as well.
And everybody's wishing your mom and dad a happy birthday.
Oh, thank you, thank you. I will pass those messages along.
Okay, honey, you have a wonderful time. I know you're having the time of your life. You're so busy, and that's awesome. That's the best way to be, busy and having fun.
Yeah, it keeps me out of trouble.
Yeah. Thank you so much, honey. Thank you. I'll be talking with you. I'll talk with you again on the 6th.
Yes, you will. I love you to pieces,
Doreen. I love
thank you
too.
so much.
Oh, thank you, sweetheart. I love you too. Good night, Andrea.
Good night, sweetheart.
Good night. Here. And I'll see you. Hopefully I'll see you all next Sunday. You have a great week. Be safe. Have a good time. Be happy. Have lots of laughs. And I'll see you next Sunday, and thanks again so much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, for those who have just joined the show for the first time, if you would please give a like, and please subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. I do weekly shows every week with a different topic and a different subject. So, and I'm trying to bring the best to all of you with something different. I don't like always the same subject, so I hope you that's okay with you. And thanks again. Good night, everybody. Thank you. Good night. I love you. Good night.